Welcome to the UNLV Writing Center's workshop on punctuation. In this workshop, we will review the 8 most common punctuation marks and their usage in academic writing: the period, comma, semicolon, colon, hyphen, dash, apostrophe, and quotation marks. Depending on your discipline and whether or not you utilize MLA, APA, or Chicago-style formatting, punctuation may or may not be used differently. This workshop intends to shed a light on the different purposes of punctuation, but you also might want to check our other resources on formatting citations, which are linked in the video description below and found on the UNLV Writing Center website. Here, we'll learn how standard punctuation use can help with clarity of ideas in your writing. You can think of punctuation as traffic signs or guide that help the reader navigate their way through sentences, and depending on the construction of the sentence, many punctuation marks are mandatory. The period is the most common example of this. Another example is quotation marks that must be used if you are including a direct quote in a paper. On the other hand, some punctuation marks can be optional, and instead are used to add clarity to the sentence structure. Other punctuation marks are interchangeable and can be substituted for others. An example includes the semicolon, which we'll cover later in the workshop. The first major type of punctuation mark is the period. If you're thinking about punctuation in terms of a traffic signal, a period is a full stop and signifies the end of a complete sentence or a thought that is a statement. A period can follow an independent clause, which is a phrase that has a subject and a predicate. Periods are also used in abbreviations, acronyms, or initialisms, which may fall in the middle of your sentence or at the end. If any of these word types fall at the end of a sentence, you do not add an additional period, like in the case of etc. or e.g. If you are asking a question or have some sort of exclamatory statement, then a question mark or exclamation point would replace a period at the end of your sentence. Commas are another common punctuation mark, and they are often misused because there are several comma rules. It can be difficult to identify which rule needs to be followed in which situation, so we will talk through all 9 of the rules now. When you have a list or a set of items in a series, use commas to separate 3 or more words or phrases. The final comma, used before a conjunction, is known as the Oxford comma. Here are some examples of how to use commas in a series. Students must register for classes, comma, move into the dorms, comma, and buy their books before the semester begins. The Oxford comma has some critics, however. Its use can add clarity to your sentences. In the example, Jane enjoys cooking, comma, her family, comma, and her dog. Omission of the final comma between her family and her dog may lead readers to believe that Jane may be a sociopath who enjoys cooking up her family and her dog for her next meal. With independent clauses and coordinating conjunctions, use a comma to separate them. Coordinating conjunctions are most commonly known as the words for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so, or fanboys, which is an acronym that may ring a bell for you. Here are some examples of how to use commas with an independent clause and coordinating conjunction. The professor instructed the students to read the next chapter, comma, but the students ignored him. The professor instructed the students to read the next chapter is a complete sentence and independent clause. So we can use a comma and the coordinating conjunctions but to connect it to the related full sentence, the students ignored him. We mentioned before that a period can come after an independent clause, and that is still true. But then you would not use the coordinating conjunction. The professor instructed the students to read the next chapter, period. The students ignored him, period. So you have a choice in how you can write the statement. However, if you use the coordinating conjunction, you must use the comma. In the second example, we see the same thing. The bears did not seem interested in the hikers, comma, nor did they get out of the water. Nor is the coordinating conjunction, so we must have the comma. Whenever you have an introductory word, phrase or dependent clause like unfortunately, nonetheless, or an attributive phrase, insert a comma right after it. Here are some examples to demonstrate this. You use commas after a single word or direct address, like someone's name. For example, see, comma, the answer is not that complicated. Just like the first example, you can offset introductory phrases with a comma. The clause after the introductory phrase should be an independent one like in the example. At the conclusion of their conversation, comma, the student and instructor both left the classroom. Here, the student and instructor both left the classroom can stand on its own as a complete sentence, so there must be a comma between it and the introductory phrase. Finally, you can offset a dependent clause from the independent clause. For example, because they were thirsty, comma, the elephants came to the lake to drink. Here, because they were thirsty cannot stand on its own as a sentence. So it is a dependent clause, not an independent one. You only use a comma if the dependent clause comes first. If you flipped this sentence to, the elephants came to the lake to drink because they were thirsty, you would not use a comma. Non-restrictive elements can be removed from a sentence without changing the meaning of a sentence. Non-restrictive elements also give extra detail and additional information. Commas are used to introduce or set these elements off. The herd of ostriches ran toward our car, comma, which caused us all to scream. In a sentence like this, information that comes after which is generally extra information, so we would offset it with a comma. You can also have non-restrictive elements in the middle of a sentence. For example, they thought we had food for them, comma, which we did not, comma, so they eventually wandered away. Here, which we did not, is not central to the point of the sentence, and since it could be removed and the sentence still understood, it is set apart with commas. Appositives add non-essential information concerning the noun contained in a sentence. When they are non-restrictive, they are set off by commas. In the first example, buying school books took over an hour even with an additional salesperson, comma, Miss Johnson, comma, who had to work another cash register. In this sentence, the identity of the cashier is not essential to understanding how busy the bookstore was, so her name is set apart with commas. When an appositive adds information that is considered essential to identify a noun, it is not set off with commas. In the second example, the Scarlet and Gray reporter Susan Brightwell conducted a telephone interview with Professor Jane Knows. The identity of the reporter is important. We need to know who conducted the interview, so here the name is not set apart with commas. When using cumulative adjectives, you do not have to use a comma between adjectives that cannot be joined by and. In the example, the graduate student worked over the summer vacation and completed a 200-page, 6-chapter handwritten thesis. There are no commas between 200-page, 6-chapter, or handwritten, because you would not say a 206-chapter and handwritten thesis. Each of the adjectives modifies the main noun of thesis, and since they cannot be joined by the word and, you do not need a comma. However, you do want to utilize a comma to separate coordinate adjectives and adverbs as they modify the subject of a sentence rather than each other and also can be joined together by the and conjunction. For example, the class has smart, comma, eager, comma, energetic students, or the class has smart and eager and energetic students. These adjectives modify the subject of the sentence, the class separately, so that they need commas between them. If you're writing out a date in full month, day, year format, put a comma between the day and year. You'll also put a comma after the year. You also use a comma to separate geographic places like in the following example. The study abroad students traveled to London, comma, England, comma, on February 2nd, comma, 2015, comma, before catching a train to Stonehenge. Something important to keep in mind is that when you are using direct quotations, if it is less than 50 words, you can set it off with a comma unless it is introduced by a colon, or if the quote is part of the sentence or woven into the sentence. You can see an example here using a comma and one using a colon. The cashier did not believe the person asking for a discount was a student, so they said, comma or colon, quotation mark, show me an ID. Now, moving on to semicolons. They are primarily used to separate independent clauses that are not joined by conjunctions. The sentences should be related or share a topic. For example, Louise Erdrich is of Ojibwe and German descent, semicolon. She writes about both heritages in her novel. You will mainly use semicolons to separate independent clauses if the second clause begins with a conjunctive, adverb, or transitional expression rather than a conjunction. That adverb or expression is followed by a comma. Ojibwe author Louise Erdrich allowed Henry Louis Gates to research her genealogy for his television show, semicolon. However, comma, she would not let him analyze her DNA. You can use a semicolon to separate an appositive or elaboration at the end of the sentence, or if the subject matter is introduced by the words or phrases that is, for example, or namely. The professor's actions were within the guidelines of the English department policy, semicolon, that is, comma, they were justified, comma, lawful, comma, and proper. Finally, semicolons are also used in the place of commas to separate items in a series, if any of the items have an internal comma or if the semicolon would add more clarity. Classic science fiction sagas are Star Trek, comma, with Dr. Spock, semicolon, Battlestar Galactica, comma, with its Cylon Raiders, semicolon, and Star Wars, comma, with Han Solo, comma, Luke Skywalker, comma, and Darth Vader. Transitioning to the next type of punctuation mark, colons are used when you are joining separate but directly related clauses or phrases. If there is an independent clause that follows a colon, it can begin with a lowercase or capital letter. Remember, the clause before a colon should be an independent clause, meaning it can stand on its own. The professor's actions were within the guidelines of the English department policy, colon. They were justified, lawful, and proper. The they after the colon can be lowercase or a capital letter. Colons can also precede a list or a statement. Puppy therapy is used for various groups, colon, college students, sick children, and elderly patients. You have two options, colon, redo the assignment for a lower grade, or fail the course. We will go over hyphens next. You will use a hyphen between two or more words when they come before a noun and act as one primary idea. 7 hyphen, year hyphen, old boy, or off hyphen, campus apartment are examples. Numbers between 21 and 29 should also be hyphenated, with the hyphen falling between the larger number and the smaller number. M and N dashes, which are not interchangeable with hyphens, have different purposes. M dashes are longer than a hyphen and are used to offset information similar to a way a comma or parentheses would. The M dash is generally a stylistic choice and can be used to emphasize a phrase. N dashes are longer than a hyphen but shorter than an M dash. It is used to signify a range, like a page range or time range. Apostrophes have very few rules, but are often misused. A common mistake is that people insert apostrophes to make words plural. Apostrophes are used to show possession, not to make a singular noun plural. The final letter of the noun showing possession and whether the noun is singular or plural will dictate where the apostrophe goes. Generally, if the noun showing possession is singular, you will add the apostrophe at the end of the letter and add the letter S. If the word or name ends in the letter S, like the name Charles, you can put the apostrophe before the S, or you can omit the additional S and just place the apostrophe at the end of the word. For plural nouns like the word parents or the last name Jones, when you're referring to a whole family, the apostrophe should go at the end and no additional S should be added to the word. Apostrophes also take the place of omitted letters in contractions. They have becomes they've, omitting the HA in have. She would becomes she'd, omitting the W, O, U, and L from would. The final type of punctuation we will cover is quotation marks. Quotation marks can indicate two things. If you are inserting dialogue into a story, you'll use quotation marks to indicate that someone is speaking. In academic writing, we use quotation marks to show that we are quoting your source or sources word for word. Quotation marks are only for direct quotations, not paraphrased or summarized information. When it comes to quotation marks, you always use periods and commas on the inside of the quotation marks. Put colons and semicolons outside of quotation marks. Do you have any questions, comments, concerns, or corrections for any of the materials presented? Contact the Writing Center at writingcenter@unlv.edu, and we'll get your questions answered or take feedback on how we can improve. If you need more assistance with punctuation rules, we have plenty of resources at the UNLV Writing Center. When our physical location is open, we have printed handouts, a full computer lab with work cubicles, and printing access. We also offer one-on-one consultations with writers in person or online. When we are able to get back on campus, we accept drop-ins, though we highly recommend you make an appointment, especially during exam weeks. We are normally open Sunday to Friday, but check our website for the most up-to-date hours. Our main office is located in the Central Desert Complex Building number 3. Most semesters we offer 2 satellite locations that are open in the evenings. Depending on the night, you can find us either in the Dayton Hall South Conference Room or the Lead Library's Armagosa Room. Hours and maps to both locations can also be found on our website. You can also contact us with quick questions, which is any question that will take us less than 10 minutes to answer, without having to schedule an appointment. Send us an email or Google chat at writingcenter@unlv.edu or give us a call at 702-895-3908. As for our online resources, we have PDF versions of our handouts on topics including writing thesis statements, punctuation, and using MLA, APA, and Chicago formatting styles, some of which are linked in the video description below. To explore more resources, visit our website at writingcenter.unlv.edu. Our website also gives you access to the most up-to-date information on our hours, as well as access to our online writing lab and information on how to schedule virtual consultations. On our website, you'll also find other workshops like the one you just watched, as well as a schedule for any in-person workshops we may offer and more. For the latest information on Writing Center happenings, follow us on social media. You can find out more information about Writing Center and UNLV campus events, learn writing tips, expand your vocabulary, meet our consultants, and find some motivation for writing, and much, much more. We look forward to working with you in the Writing Center. Happy writing!